of my conversation with Mr. Hoskins, but quite frankly, I don't remember the specifics of what's on that note.
For the record, the parties have agreed that all of Mr. Bright's notes are pre-admitted. I'm not sure whether this one made it into that stack.
I understand.
So this is not marked. I'm going to show it to Mr. Bright.
You may approach it.
Thank you.
Yes, sir.
Mr. Bright, is that your note? Is the note you were referring to?
Yes, it is. And I specifically note, this is the way that I would typically make notes, is I would point out that I talked to someone who they were involved with or why I was making the note. It shows a date, which in this case is October 9th, 2008, and this is my handwriting.
Would you have made that contemporaneously with your conversation with Mr. Hoskins?
Absolutely. That's the way I typically do things.
And what does it indicate that Mr. Hoskins said to you?
He was telling me that during various press conferences that, and I can't remember if he said existing council members or newly elected council members said that they would suspend Joey come January 1st. They will assign him tasks he cannot complete and ultimately terminate his employment.
And how did Mr. Hoskins characterize his goal for?
It was apparent to me from the very beginning that from his perspective, his client, because of the disruption within the county government and the newly elected people coming on board, that he was telling me, and these are the words that I use, that he knows he's finished and he needs to go out on his own terms. Now, I'm not sure that Mr. Hoskins said that exactly, but that is the impression I got. Those were my words.
And we will deal with admitting that appropriately if it's not more.
Thank you.
Mr. Bright, do you recall what you did next in order to carry out your responsibilities to the county?
Well, as I said, one of the first things that I did was I met with Michael Thompson, who was at the time chairman of county council. I did several things, just kind of get a sense from him what was the scope of what he wanted me to do. And the scope of what he suggested to me is we need to find a way to have an amicable separation of Mr. Preston from the position of administrator. I wanted to make sure that Mr. Mitchell or that Mr. Thompson understood that I had done work for Anderson County before, so I shared that with him. And in fact had worked with Joey Preston, and he understood that. I also made it abundantly clear that I wanted to talk to every council member before I did anything, so I could just get some sense of what each of the council members were thinking.
Did you also perform legal research?
I'm sure at some point in time we did legal research because that's what this was about. This was about an employment contract. One of the questions I had in my mind was it enforceable? What were some of the legal issues associated with that? What are some of the practical issues associated with what they were trying to accomplish? So to tell you I did the research before I talked to people or after I talked to people, I can't tell you that. But yes, legal research would have been part of that process.
Did you read Mr. Preston's existing employment contract?
No doubt I read his contract probably more than once. Again, can I tell you when in this sequence of events I read it? No, but I certainly would have read it fairly early on.
Did you in fact talk to each member of county council?
Yes, sir, I did.
All right, and there are notes in the file that have been pre-admitted that reflect all of those.
Yeah, in fact, that's one of the things I did is to make sure that I had made notes of those conversations, which I did.
Do you have a general recollection as we sit here today of the impression that you came away from after completing those conversations?
It was clear to me that there were members of the sitting county council who were supporters of Joey Preston, who believed in Joey Preston. There were those who did not. I could, at that point in time, I could have identified who they were. But I think that there was a unanimous feel that this is not going to be a good situation. There was a need, these are my terms, my words, for basically a divorce, and for him to leave county government, and for the council to move on and find another county administrator.
Did you, at some point, Mr. Bright, ask for a calculation of the amount of severance that would have been due to Mr. Preston under his employment contract had he been terminated without cause?
Yeah, at some point in time, I believe that I made a contact through the then personnel office, through, I think, Phyllis McAllister, to contact the right person who would be able to look at his employment contract and be able to provide me with the various elements of what those pieces were worth.
May I approach the witness?
You may.
Mr. Bright, I'll show you what's been pre-admitted as Plaintiff's Exhibit 15. Do you recognize that?
Yes, I do.
What is that?
This is, in fact, a communication from Gina Humphreys to me saying, here is the spreadsheet that entails the value of Mr. Preston's contract. And then the second page is an itemized listing of all the elements that were contained in that contract. And I'm not, that's basically what it is.
What's the date of the email from Ms. Humphreys to you?
October 17th, 2008.
All right, and do you know what role Ms. Humphreys had in Anderson County?
I believe she was the head of finance. If I'm not mistaken.
Turning your attention to the second page, is it your understanding that this spreadsheet or this table on the second page is Ms. Humphrey's calculation of the aggregate value of the severance benefits under Mr. Preston's contract?
Yeah, in fact, it says summary of all compensation and benefits that would be expended either to administrator or on his behalf in the event of a contract termination without cause.
All right, and what is the total amount that Ms. Humphreys calculated?
The total at the bottom right was $827,222.
Did you at some point after that receive a demand letter from Rob Hoskins?
There was a detailed letter from Rob Hoskins. I couldn't tell you exactly what date. I want to say September 27th, but I'm not positive. That detailed not only, well, it detailed his position on behalf of his client, why he was asking for what he was asking for.
May I approach the witness?
You may. Excuse me.
Mr. Bright, I've handed you what's been pre-admitted as Plaintiff's Exhibit 22. Do you recognize that letter as Mr. Hoskins' demand letter that was sent to you?
Yes, and it's a little later than I thought. It's October 23rd, but yes, this is the one. Is this letter the first dollar demand on behalf of Mr. Preston that you're aware of? It's the first one that I can recall. That doesn't mean Rob Hoskins didn't say something to you earlier, but this is the first one that I recall.
Let me ask you first to look at the last sentence of the first paragraph. What's Mr. Hoskins conveying there?
It is consistent with Plaintiff's Exhibit number 15, in that he's reflecting that the value of his employment contract was $827,222.
And in fact, that's identical to the dollar to
Yes.
what Ms. Humphries provided.
Yes, it is.
Was that all that Mr. Hoskins was demanding on behalf of Mr. Preston?
Again, I don't think there's clearly references to potential for other claims against individual council members. There's a request for retirement service credit. So there are additional dollar amounts.
Right. Mr. Bright, let me ask you to look at the first sentence of the second paragraph of this same letter there on the first page. Mr. Hoskins there refers to a number of causes of action which Mr. Preston will assert against 2 current council members as well as maybe 1 or more incoming council members.
Yes.
Do you recall that as Mr. Hoskins' justification for claiming more than the amount due under the contract?
Yes, and if you go on to the next sentence, he also talks about tort claims, given the extreme malice and intentional nature of the actions of the council over the past several years. I don't know that Rob ever articulated a specific tort claim, but it was clear that this was, in his mind and in the message he was conveying to me as counsel for the county, that this was more than a breach of contract.
And you anticipated to some extent the question I was going to ask you. This letter does not specify any particular tort claim, does it?
No, it does not.
And I think you said you don't recall that Mr. Hoskins ever did specify a particular tort claim.
No, I don't remember. He may have, and I just don't remember it, but I don't have any specific recollection of it.
Was Mr. Hoskins asserting that Mr. Preston had tort claims against the county as an entity or only against individual council members and council members of that?
Again, when I read this letter, it talks about the individuals. I don't remember having any recollection that in his mind there was or in what he was conveying to me, that there was a difference between the two.
Were you being paid by the Insurance Reserve Fund or by the county itself, to your knowledge?
I don't remember. I just don't remember.
Let me ask you.
I would suspect it was probably the county.
Let me ask you to look at the second page of this letter. The second paragraph details additional amounts that Mr. Hoskins says Mr. Preston needs, is the way he puts it. What are the additional amounts that Mr. Hoskins is claiming? Actually, the third paragraph is a better summary of all of the amounts, if I can direct your attention there.
I think there's a $356,087 through to purchase credits through the South Carolina retirement system, retiree health benefits of an additional $92,772.
And those are in addition to the $827,222 that have been calculated as the maximum amount available under the severance provision of employment.
Correct.
What is your recollection of how Mr. Hoskins explained that he arrived at the $356,087 retirement system credit payment?
I don't know how he calculated that number. I don't know where that came from. I do know that at one point in time, my office tried to contact and did in fact contact the South Carolina retirement system, and in providing them with a scenario of someone with this number of years of service and trying to get this much credit, what would that cost be? And I know that we at least looked at that.
Was Mr. Hoskins' goal to allow Mr. Preston to retire immediately?
The goal was to have an immediate separation of his employment, and that this would be an attempt in resolution of all his supposed claims, allow him to have that level of retirement and to leave the county.
And did you understand that that included his commencing to draw a pension immediately after the separation?
I don't remember that Rob and I ever discussed what, when, or if Mr. Preston would begin to draw anything. This was an attempt to try and put a value on what does it cost to get him to a place where he could.
Do you recall, Mr. Bright, how many times you met with the personnel committee of the Anderson County Council?
I know I met at least twice with the personnel committee.
Were both of those meetings after your receipt of this October 23rd letter?
I have to believe that the answer to that question is yes, because there wouldn't have been anything to discuss with them until we had this demand.
Mr. Davis just showed Mr. Wallace a moment ago a document that suggested, I think it was one of your notes, that suggested the first meeting was October 27th, 2008. Is that consistent with your recollection?
Yes, it is.
At that meeting, what advice did you give to the personnel committee?
Well, by that point in time, as I told you, I couldn't remember when we did research and when I talked to all the individual council members, but by that point in time, I would have done my legal research. I would have had a conversation with Rob Hoskins. I would have had the letter from October 23rd with his various demands. And I would have talked to each of the council members. At that point in time, I had 2 or 3 things that I felt I needed to convey to the personnel committee. The first of those was that Rob Hoskins had in his initial letter of September 25th, and then again in the letter of October 23rd, was claiming that his client was being constructively discharged. For lack of a better term, that's the creation of intolerable working conditions that forces someone out of their job. I made the observation to the personnel committee that I didn't see anything that suggested anything of the sort, and therefore I didn't think much of a claim of constructive discharge. I also made the observation that because the consternation seemed to be between the newly elected council members and Mr. Preston, one of the recommendations I made is that they not do anything right now. That they allow the new city council to deal with the issue of Mr. Preston. Have Mr. Preston go about his job, do what he'd been hired to do, and let the new council deal with it. The third thing that I tried to share with the council was that there was a long line of cases in the state of South Carolina that suggested that his employment contract in the first place was void or voidable. In other words, they didn't have to pay him this money. He didn't have a 3-year contract as you and I would think of it. And I made that very clear to them. But at the same time, as any good lawyer does, I made sure that they understood, but you never know when you get in the courtroom what's going to happen. And so I shared with them what I felt might be some of the worst case scenarios if Mr. Preston were to sue the county and if Mr. Preston were able to prevail. So I shared that whole panoply of thoughts that I had about how to handle this whole process.
Mr. Bright, you mentioned or you testified that you advised the committee specifically on the claim of constructive discharge. Did you separately analyze and provide advice on a claim of anticipatory breach?
Yeah, I mean, to me, the concept of either constructive discharge or anticipatory breach went hand in hand in my legal thinking, whether something had been done that would suggest a breach in the future or whether something had already been done. I didn't think either of those things had happened, and so I didn't give much credence to those claims at that time.
We also talked about Mr. Hoskins' claim of unspecified torts. Did you place additional value on those purported tort claims?
Again, I think that in trying to convey to the personnel committee, again, what a good lawyer does is he doesn't make decisions for his clients. He lays out all the facts and allows them to make choices. And I wanted to make sure they had a full understanding of what all the possible ramifications were for this particular contract and for the claims that Mr. Preston was raising.
Did you tell the committee that you had concerns about their own personal liability potentially?
One of the last things that I made sure that the council was aware of, and I'm not sure exactly how I put this, but I said to them, and this really kind of goes hand in hand with telling them to leave it for the new council, is I made the comment that I said, I can't tell you right now that I know of any theory of law which would support a lawsuit against the individual council members if they were to make a decision to give Joey the kind of money that he was asking for in these letters. But that I had a concern that that is something that could happen in the future. In fact, it became a matter of dialogue between Mr. Hoskins and myself, because he wrote me a letter at some point in time saying he can't think of any theory like that either. But I was concerned that at some point in time, a taxpayer within the county might say to the